A web application is a computer program that utilizes web browsers and web technology to perform tasks over the internet. Now, millions of businesses use the internet as a cost effective communications channel. It lets them exchange information with their target market and make fast, secure transactions. Now, Web Application Framework or simply Web Framework is a software framework that is designed to support the development of web applications including the web services, web resources, and web APIs. Hi everyone. So today's session is about such a framework that helps you develop your application faster and smarter. Today we will discuss about one of the top web application framework that is Ruby on Rails. Now Ruby on Rails is an extremely productive web application framework written by David Hansen. Now, one can develop an application at least 10 times faster with Rails than a typical Java framework. Moreover, Rails includes everything needed to create a database driven web application using the model view controller pattern. Now, the language used for Ruby on Rails is Ruby programming language. So, let's begin with what is Ruby. It is a dynamic open source programming language with a focus on simplicity and productivity. Now, it has an elegant syntax that is natural to read and easy to write. Now, a lot of languages are object oriented, but they still have the primitive data type. They will have mostly everything as an object, but still with exceptions for integers or maybe characters or something. In Ruby, absolutely everything is an object, meaning everything operates in the same paradigm of sending and receiving messages. Now, in addition to being a general purpose programming language, Ruby supports object oriented, functional, and imperative programming paradigms. Now, the programming language further focuses on simplicity and productivity. Its expressive syntax rules enable programmers to build web applications by writing natural to read code. Now, many developers even opt for Ruby to create prototypes without putting extra time and effort. So let's move on and have a look at some of the versions of Ruby. Now, the first public release of Ruby 0.95 was announced on Japanese domestic news groups on December 21, 1995. Subsequently, three more versions of Ruby were released in 2 days. From December 25, 1996 to September 2000, four more versions such as the 1.0, 1.2, 1.4 and 1.6 were also released. Next was the version 1.8, which was initially released in August 2003. It was stable for a long time and retired in June 2013. Ruby 1.9 was released on Christmas Day in 2007, effective with Ruby 1.9.3, released October 31, 2011. Subsequently, Ruby version 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2 were also released with some added features along with it. Next up was the Ruby 2.3 that was released on Christmas Day in 2015. A few notable changes included the ability to mark all string literals as frozen by default, with a consequently large performance increase in string operations, hash comparison to allow direct checking of key or value pairs instead of just keys. Next up was the Ruby 2.4, which was released on Christmas Day in 2016. There were few more notable changes included in this version as well. Next up came the version 2.5 and 2.6, which were released on Christmas days in 2017 and 18 respectively. Now in Ruby 2.6, we had the JIT and the Ruby VM. This is also the latest version available in Ruby. Now let's have a look at some of the advantages of this programming language. Now, its use of English-like syntax and common language feels so native and logical that some parts of the code read like English declarations. So the simple and readable syntax enables Ruby developers to do more with less code. That readability also makes Ruby almost self-documenting. Next up is the faster development. Now, web development with Ruby on Rails is faster due to the object orientation of Ruby. The lean code base modular design, extensive open source code developed by the Rails community, and a wide range of ready to use plugin solutions for feature development. Next up is the easy code maintenance and updates. Now, modifying the existing code and adding new features to a site are easy. This is particularly valuable for long-term projects and startups. Now, if you need to update an application or to refactor its code long after it was developed and deployed, this convention will help the new employees or freelancers step up and pick up on everything quickly. Next up is the cost effectiveness. Now, if your group is on a budget, you probably wish to avoid the licensing costs of conventional languages, especially if needed on various devices at different locations. Now, it can run on the free open source Linux and works well with many free web servers and databases. Next up is the quality product. Now, the developers can more easily build websites that follow the principles of good development. Now, thanks to available high quality libraries, they don't have to write boilerplate code every time. Instead, they can concentrate on discovering your business needs and building a better product for you. Now, moving on, let's have a look at some of the companies that are using Ruby programming language. Some of the big companies include the Airbnb, Kickstarter, Hulu, Twitter, GitHub, Basecamp, Shopify, and Urban Dictionary. Now, the developers cannot write large and complex web applications in Ruby without leveraging web frameworks. The tools, libraries, and utilities provided by Ruby Web Frameworks enable programmers to write web applications according to varied business requirements. Some of the best frameworks are the Ruby on Rails, Rhoda, Sinatra, Cuba, Hanami, Scorch, Trailblazer, and many more. So today we will focus on one of the most important frameworks, that is Ruby on Rails. Now, Ruby on Rails is the most popular web framework for Ruby programming language. The full stack web framework comes with features to facilitate both client-side and server-side web development. It provides the basic structure required by developers to create web pages, web services, and databases. Also, it enables developers to build user interfaces by combining HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and XML. Also, Ruby on Rails developers have the option to add functionality to the web applications without writing additional code by using a variety of robust Ruby gems. Now let's list out and explain in brief why Ruby on Rails is chosen out of hundreds of other programming languages. First of all, it has strong adherence to standards, one of the most notable advantages of Ruby programming language, as well as Ruby on Rails is a strong backing of web standards for every part of an application, from the user interface to data transfer. It's perfect for the web technologies. Not just that, it also saves money and saves a lot of time. Although it is relatively easy to learn the basics of this framework, it will take some time for you to unlock its true potential. However, if you're ready to invest some time in this, you will definitely be amazed at how fast and effective you have become. It also has a huge and active community. Now, around 10% of the 10,000 most popular websites in the world use Ruby on Rails. Now, this puts it in the top 3 most used web development tools. It means that quite a lot of people all over the world use this framework for creating software. Now, furthermore, there is a huge community of Ruby on Rails developers on GitHub, and it is really active. Now, there are many snippets of software with specific functions. Also, it is very popular among the big companies. Now, most of the time, big companies with professional analysts make good decisions about the tools they use for their projects. This is why such tools often get an indisputable reputation of being solid and reliable. Now, let's move on and have a look at more reasons why you should use Ruby on Rails. Now, the first one is the pre-coded frameworks. Now, Ruby has pre-coded frameworks and libraries like the Ruby on Rails and Chef. Now, you can use this as an extension for your own personal or professional projects. It has its own ecosystem to manage frameworks and libraries named the Ruby Gems. There are presently over 60,000 libraries. Next up is the documentation and support. Now, a manual plays a significant role in every developer's life. You will be surfing through the documentation as you work. If you're just trying to connect to a database, the screaming for help gets directly to documentation. When you're working on your code, there will be quite a lot of first times where you will require great access to good documentation or a manual. Next up is the Learning Hub. Now, it has large amounts of learning material from which you can choose. There's plenty of books, in-person courses, screencasts, and sometimes even developer boot camps committed to teaching and learning Ruby or Ruby on Rails. The final one is the Army of Community. Now, the community of Ruby on Rails is made full with ample developers who love helping out noobs. Make sure you give back once you are an expert. There are even Ruby user groups where developers fond of Ruby set up meetings in person to talk about, discuss, and learn from each other. Now, a framework is a set of programs or code library that writes most of your application for you. So when you use a framework, your job is to write the parts of the application that make it do the specific things that you want. Now, when you set out to write a Rails application, leaving aside the configuration and other housekeeping chores, you have to perform three primary tasks. The first one is describe and model your application's domain. Now, the domain is the universe of your application. Domain may be a music store, a university, a dating service, an address book, or even a hardware inventory. So, here you have to figure out what's in it, what entities exist in this universe, and how the items in it relate to each other. This is equivalent to modeling a database structure to keep the entities and their relationship. Next up is specify what can happen in this domain. Now, the domain model is static. You have to make it dynamic. Addresses can be added to an address book, musical scores can be purchased from music stores, users can log into a dating service, students can register for classes at a university. You need to identify all the possible scenarios or actions that the elements of your domain can participate in. Next up is choose and design the publicly available views of the domain. Now, at this point, you can start thinking in web browser terms. Once you have decided that your domain has students and that they can register for classes, you can envision a welcome page, a registration page, and a confirmation page, etc. Now, each of these pages or views shows the user how things stand at a certain point. Now, based on the above three tasks, Ruby on Rails deals with a model view controller framework. Now, the model view controller principle divides the work of an application into three separate but closely cooperative subsystems. So, the first one is the model. Now, this maintains the relationship between the objects and the database and handles validation, association, transactions, and more. Now, this subsystem is implemented in Active Record Library, which provides an interface and binding the tables in a relational database, and the Ruby program code that manipulates database records. Now, Ruby method names are automatically generated from the field names of database tables. Next up is the view. Now, it is a presentation of data in a particular format, triggered by a controller's decision to present the data. Now, they are script-based template systems like JSP, ASP, PHP, and very easy to integrate with Ajax technology. Now, this subsystem is implemented in Action View Library, which is an embedded Ruby-based system for defining presentation templates for data presentation. Now, every web connection to a Rails application results in the displaying of a view. Next up is the controller. Now, the facility within the application that directs traffic, on the one hand, querying the models for specific data, and on the other hand, organizing that data into a form that fits the needs of a given view. Now, this subsystem is implemented in Action Controller, which is a data broker sitting between Active Record and Action View. Now, to develop a web application using Ruby on Rails framework, you need to install the following software. First up is the Ruby, then the Rails framework, then you need a web server and also a database system. So we assume that you have already installed a web server and a database system on your computer. You can use the vBrick web server which comes with Ruby. Most websites, however, use the Apache or the LightTPD web servers in production. Now, Rails work with many database systems including the MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQLite, Oracle, DB2, and SQL Server. So let's move ahead and have a look at the installation instructions for Rails on Windows. The first step is to check the Ruby version. Now, first check if you already have Ruby installed. So open the command prompt and type Ruby-V if Ruby responds, and if it shows a version number at or above 2.2, then type gem version. If you don't get an error, skip install Ruby step. Otherwise, we will install a fresh Ruby. Now, if Ruby is not installed, then download an installation package from rubyinstallation.org. Now, follow the download link and run the resulting installer. Now, this is an exe file and will be installed in a single click. It's a very small package and you will get Ruby gems as well along with this package. So once your Ruby is installed, the next step is to install Rails. Now with Ruby gems loaded, you can install all of Rails and its dependencies using the following command through the command line. You just have to write gem install Rails. Now this might take some time to install all the dependencies. Once this step is completed, the next one is to check the Rails version. So we use the following command to check the Rails version. So here we have Rails 5.2.0, that is the latest version is installed already. So congratulations, you are now on Rails over Windows. Now you can finally use your Ruby on Rails framework and build your own web application. So now that we have seen the steps involved in installing Ruby and Rails, let's actually do it. So I don't have Ruby installed in my system, so let's start with installing Ruby first. So first of all, I'll go to rubyinstaller.org and install my Ruby. So here I'm installing the version 2.6. Now this will take some time once the Ruby is installed in my system. Now finally, we will just accept the license and install it completely. Now it will finally extract all the files and it's time that Ruby gets installed in the system. Now this is a very small package and you will get the Ruby gems as well along with this package. So while installing Ruby, we will also have our Ruby gems along with it. Now this might take some time, so we shall wait until the installation process is completed. Now once all the files are installed and extracted, now that finally we have Ruby in our system, let's check the version. So for that, we will just write ruby-v, and with that we will get the version of our Ruby programming language, that is 2.6.0. So with this, our Ruby installation is completed. Next up, we will install Rails in our system. Now to install Rails, we just have to write gem installs Rails in our command prompt. So we'll just type gem install Rails, and with this we will have our Rails installed in our system as well. Now the above command may take some time to install all dependencies. So make sure you're connected to the internet while installing gems dependencies. Now with this, we are done with our Rails installation as well. So once the Rails has been installed completely, we can check the version as well. So in order to check the Rails version, we will write the command as rails-v. So here we can see that our Rails version is 5.2.2, which is the latest version. Now with this, our Rails installation is complete as well. So now finally, we are on Rails over Windows. So this was all about how to install Ruby and Rails in our system. Now that we have the framework installed in our system, let's move on and see how it works and how we can create a web page of our own choice using Ruby on Rails. So now using the framework, we will just build a web page of our own choice. And ideally, it's best if you're aware of the fundamentals of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Ruby on Rails, of course. You need to know the Ruby programming language a little bit. And of course, you need HTML and CSS in order to build your web page. CSS will help you add more styles to your web page whenever you are building anything new or anything creative. So let's move ahead and see how we can create our web page. So here we are going to use the PostgreSQL as our database. Now it is a popular choice among Ruby on Rails community. So once you're familiar with the PostgreSQL, navigate to a directory where you keep your projects and open a command line prompt. So here I'll be saving all my files in the C directory. So let's move ahead and generate a new app. Now in order to generate a new app, we have to run the line Rails new collab field database equals to PostgreSQL. Now here we are creating a folder named as collab field. You can name your folder or file anything that you want it to be, and we are using the database as PostgreSQL. Now collab field is basically the application, the name of our application. Now by default, Rails uses SQLite 3, but since we want to use the PostgreSQL as our database, we need to specify it by adding the database equals to PostgreSQL. So with this, we have successfully generated a new application. So we can see that we have a folder named collab field in my C drive because I've saved it in my C directory. So now let's move on and get inside this file. So for this, we have to just type cd collab field, and now we are inside this directory. So once we are inside our directory, we can just run our app by entering Rails S. So let's see what happens when we use this command Rails S. So with this, we just started our app. Now we should be able to see what we got so far. So when we open a browser and go to the localhost 3000, we will see our Rails signature welcome page. So here you can see that after Rails S, we have our localhost 3000. And once we go to the page, we are on the Rails signature welcome page. It says, yay, you are on Rails. So finally, we have come into the Rails page. So this was just the beginning where you just connected to your Rails page. Now in this page, you can make all the changes and you can build your own website or create your own web page and build it according to your needs or however you want it to. You can design it according to your will and whatever applications or whatever options you need to create in your web page, you can add inside this. So let's see how we can do that. So we can always start by creating some kind of basic visual structure and then build everything else around that. So let's just start with that. So now when we go to the localhost 3000, we see the Rails welcome page. Now we are going to switch this default page with our own home page. Now in order to do that, we need to generate a new controller called pages. Now to create the controller pages, we just have to run the command Rails G controller pages. Now this Rails generator should have created some files for us. So you can see the output looks like this in the command prompt. It creates and invokes certain files. Now we are going to use this pages controller to manage our special and static pages. Now all you have to do is open your Collab Field project in a text editor. Here I'm using the Notepad++. So we just have to open the file pages_controller.rb, which is inside the apps controllers, and here we have the pages controller.rb. Now here we will be defining our home page. Of course, we could define home page in a different controller and in different ways, but usually we like to define the home page inside our pages controller itself. Now, when we open the pages controller.rb file, we see this. We see there's a class pages controller with application controller and end. Now, this is basically an empty class which is named as pages controller, which inherits from the application controller class. Now, you can find this class source code in app controller application controller.rb. So now all our controllers which we will create are going to inherit from the application controller class, which means that all methods defined inside this class are going to be available across all our controllers. So here we will define a public method named index. So it can be callable as an action as well. So we will just enter def index. We are defining our index end, and that's all for our index action.rb. So now the routing determines which controller and its public method to call. So let's define a root. So when we open our root page of the website, Rails knows which controller and its action to call. So for that, we just have to open our routes.rb file, which is inside app config, and here we can see the routes.rb. So inside our routes.rb file, we already have rails.application.routes.drawDo. So here we just have to insert a line that says root2: pages hash index. Now the hash symbol in Ruby represents a method. So as you remember, an action is just a public method. So here the pages hash index says call the pages controller and its public method index. So once we are done with this and we save this, now if we go back to our root path, that is the localhost 3000, the index action would be called, but we don't have any templates to render yet. So let's create a new template for our index action. For that, we have to go to the app folder, then views and pages, and create an index.html.erb file inside this directory. Now inside this file, we can always write our regular HTML plus embedded Ruby code. So we can just write something inside the file so we could see the rendered template in the browser. So here I'll just write welcome to Edureka and save this one. Now once we go to our localhost 3000 again and load this page, we can see it comes as welcome to Edureka. Now instead of the default Rails information page, we have our home page which says welcome to Edureka. So this was just the very basic starting point of our website. Now we can start introducing new things to our website. Now, this is a very simple procedure. If you are well known with HTML and C++, this is going to be very easy for you because you just have to design a web page according to your needs. So we can just write an HTML code and build up our own web page. If you want to know more about the HTML and CSS, do follow our HTML tutorial and CSS tutorial that teaches you how to build a website from scratch. So here I have taken this code that helps me build up a web page of my own. So this is an entire HTML code which just helps me build a designed website, and I have just designed it according to my needs. I have added templates and headers and subheadings. So here is the web page that says Welcome to Edureka, and this is the website created using the Ruby on Rails framework. You can always add a lot more features in your web page, for which you just need to be very well aware with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, and all of these. This will help you build an amazing website of your choice. This was just an example of how you can build a website from scratch and how you can design it according to your own needs using the Ruby on Rails framework. So this was all about today's session. I hope it has helped you know about the Ruby on Rails framework and how you can use it to build your own website from scratch, because it is definitely one of the most popular frameworks used for all web applications. So I hope this session was useful, and do let us know about your opinion in the comment section below. Till then, thank you and happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!